I'm Habiba Islam. I work in the one-on-one team doing careers advising with 80,000 hours, and this is going to be a career planning workshop to kick off the EAG weekend. What we're going to do in this workshop is focus specifically on longer term plans that you might have for your career goals. So this is explicitly not going to be focusing on like if you're facing like an immediate kind of career choice between a couple of different options. If that's the situation that you have, there's like different advice that might apply, but this workshop is going to be focusing on longer term plans. We're going to really try and focus on like trying to identify some of the core uncertainties that you have so that we can like come up with a plan for things that you can do right here this weekend at the conference to try and make progress on some of your uncertainties. So hopefully the idea is that this will be very like action focused as a workshop today. The thing that we're going to go through is sort of loosely based on the beginning of the 80,000 hours career planning process, which is an 8-week course available on our website. It's 8 weeks long, so we're not going to do the whole thing. We're going to do a little taster of the beginning kind of brainstorming longer term paths. We're going to start off with like the personal priorities, think about impact, think about what problems seem pressing, doing this brainstorming on longer term paths, like I said, kind of try and gear it towards the kinds of things that you can get an answer on this weekend. Okay, does that seem good? Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, here we go. So first of all, what is a career plan? I think I just want to set some expectations that sort of when I hear that term, I think sometimes I might think, oh man, a career plan means you need to have these like a detailed every step you're going to take over the next 5 years. And I think that is not what I mean. That kind of level of detail is like unrealistic and also not very helpful because the world is going to change. So just to set expectations about what is kind of the core part of the career plan that I think is actually useful is just like a sense of what kinds of things you want to achieve and like a rough sense of like what might be sensible steps to get there. But like fundamentally focusing on how to make progress on your uncertainties. So this is very much an iterative process. You can come up with some ideas, then you go out into the real world, test things, update your information about what seems good, and then go back round again. Okay? So first step when you're thinking about longer term career planning is to start off with thinking about what your own personal priorities are. Because none of us are just maximizing like impact. That's not anyone's own like single priority in their life. So it's important to be clear about what are the things that you're actually sort of aiming for. And so roughly this kind of covers things like what kinds of work maybe are you interested in, like how much autonomy, that kind of thing. What kind of colleagues do you want to work with? What are these kind of like some of these like basic things around where do you want to work and what kind of deal breakers you have for your longer term path. So we're going to just do the first quick exercise that we're going to do. The first of I think sort of 4 or 5 in this workshop is sort of a bit of a chance for you guys to write down some of your thoughts on these things, just so that you have a chance to have spent some time focusing on this. And as you do this, making a note of some of the things that you're not certain about and any things that you can do to get some answers on them. So this one is very much like a you question, but there may be some actions that you want to take, like maybe you want to talk to your partner about where do you see yourself living and that kind of thing. That's not the kind of action that we can do very much about at this conference, but I want to give you a chance to like write them down and maybe you want to take away some actions for afterwards. Okay, so this is our first kind of little exercise. If you're in the room, you can grab some of the pen and the paper from the center of the table if you like, or just like make notes on your phone. People who are watching at home, feel free to just make a document and start like writing down some of your thoughts. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to write down some thoughts on what are your personal priorities, what does a fulfilling career look like to you, and there are some prompts on the screen there that you might want to think about. Okay, 2 minutes, off you go. Okay, calling it there. That was the easy one. That was the question that you have access to in your own mind, all the information, hopefully, mostly. But then we get to some sort of big questions. So the step 2 of this kind of process that I sort of recommend people follow is thinking a bit about this question of positive impact. So insofar as your career also has this aspect of wanting to do the most good that you can, what does that actually mean to you? This is a huge question, and I think I wouldn't expect anyone to feel like they have the complete answer to it right now. You do not have to solve all of moral philosophy to be able to get started on your career, which is the good news. But I do think it is kind of useful to get some of your thoughts down to this question on paper, especially if you've not actually articulated this before. I had studied philosophy and had never actually tried to sort of write down the things that I really valued. I sort of had a mess of thoughts in my head until maybe a few years ago, and I did just get a bunch out of actually trying to put some words down on paper, and it starts being a bit action guiding, and it's something to think about over the years. So I think it's useful to sort of do this as you start thinking about impact. Some of you may have done a ton of this already, in which case good job, but for those of you who haven't, I think it's great to spend a bit of time as part of career planning to think about this question too. So there's a bunch of choices here. There's what's the thing that you value maybe in this kind of consequentialist framework, or maybe you value things that aren't to do with the consequences of your actions as well. There's questions around who do you think is important to help, future generations or non-human animals. Some of these questions are complicated, but it's worth having a sort of a stab at your answer to them, at least right now. And again, pointing out where you have some uncertainties. So we have an 80,000 hours kind of definition on the website, which roughly sort of points to this question of expected value is important, thinking in a consequentialist kind of way, specifically about well-being, thinking about the long term, but also with this caveat of not sacrificing anything that's of comparable moral importance. My own personal view is a bit different. I have, this is very long, but I have slightly sort of, instincts that are not so consequentialist, sort of virtue-ish instincts. I have some pluralist instincts. I care about justice, not just about welfare. I think it's useful for me to know that about the way that I think about impact. I also have some thoughts on future creatures as well. So next exercise is just having a stab at writing down some thoughts about what positive impact means to you, sort of who and sort of which beneficiaries and what kinds of things you actually value, but with an emphasis on the what are the outstanding questions that you're kind of really still confused about, and specifically which, if any of these, seem like they might be relevant, action relevant. If you changed your mind on this, it maybe would have ramifications for what you actually do with your life or your career. It seems worthwhile, making explicit some of those confusions. And then can have a go at some guesses of how might you make some progress on the things that you're particularly confused about that might actually make a difference. Specifically with reference to what you can do this weekend, could you, for example, ask someone for reading recommendations, or find someone to do a group with you where you do a chat about population ethics or something like that. Whatever it is that might actually be relevant. It's fine if there isn't anything particularly in that category, but I'm going to give you, again, a couple of minutes to write down some thoughts on this big question about what does positive impact mean to you, any particular confusions you have, and then some guesses at things that you might be able to do to make progress on those confusions. Ready? Ready? Yes! Yes! Okay, great. 2 minutes. Off you go. Okay. I'm going to move on now. It's totally fine if you haven't got the complete answer to that yet. This is a lifelong journey, I think, of getting a better sense of this. But hopefully there's some stuff that you feel maybe you can sort of do to get started on some of the really relevant bits of that. So that has been quite big picture stuff around impact, but it sets the scene for starting to get more concrete, thinking about which problems you think are the most pressing. And I think it is useful to start thinking about careers from this perspective, because it seems like one of the most important choices when you're thinking about careers, what kinds of problems you think are most important, particularly because it seems like there's a fact of the world that some problems are just 100 times more pressing than others. And so you could work 100 times as hard or 100 times as long a career on something, but it be not nearly as good as working on a different thing if you just switch to a more pressing problem. And that just seems really worth paying attention to, and make sure that you focus all of your time and energy on something where you can have the most impact. So Seems good to think about some options here. You don't have to pick something right now that's like the one problem that you like are going to devote your entire rest of the career to, but it is useful to have some guesses at some of the things that you think are most important, maybe like a cluster of things together that you think are particularly important, and rule some things in or out. And at this stage, I think it's useful to stay thinking big picture about like the biggest problems in the world, rather than thinking so specifically about where your skill set might be useful. And one of the reasons why I think that's important is because there are often ways to contribute to problems that you might not have expected if you didn't do this step. So for example, there are often organizations that need like operations people, or maybe there's ways of doing fundraising or something like that that could be applicable to many different causes, even if you don't have the technical skills for doing like research in that area or something. So I think it seems useful to start off by thinking, big picture about problems, even when you're thinking about your own specific career. There's a ton of like practical questions, sort of like difficult questions that go into what the answer to this question is. What things just are most like neglected? What needs more attention? Specifically, if you're part of the effective altruism community, thinking about what's like relatively neglected within the community. The scale of different problems in the world, like maybe some big questions about sort of how we relate to future generations and some of these like big catastrophic risks. How plausible actually are they? These are like practical, empirical questions that I think will massively impact on what choices you pick here. So now we're going to do the exercise of getting some guesses of some of the most pressing problems, and like if you can, think about ranking them. But again, I think a big emphasis on like what are your biggest uncertainties here? Like what are the things that could change your mind? What are you like the most unsure of when you're trying to put this ranking in place? And I think this one hopefully is something that this weekend can hopefully get you sort of started on in terms of making progress on some of your uncertainties. There are a bunch of different ways that you might be able to start getting some input into resolving some of your questions around this. So I think, again, like a strong emphasis on like if you identify a specific uncertainty, like I'm just not sure like how big a scale like mental health is like as a cause area or something. Are there people that you could like look up on Swapcard to like have a conversation about that? Could they direct you in the direction of like some more research in the area or something like that? So that's the kind of thing I'm going for here. Try and give like a brainstorm, like 5 to 6 if you can, like go longer if you want to just do a longer brainstorm of some problems that seem the most pressing. And then what are your biggest uncertainties here and how might you make some progress on them? And then we get to paths after this, but problems first. Okay, 3 minutes now and off you go. We'll stop there then. Is anyone comfortable sharing maybe one of the sort of, from any of the sections we've done so far, one of the questions that you had and the sort of action that you're thinking of taking to resolve your uncertainty or like make progress on it? You want to give me a wave if you are? It's totally fine if you don't want to. Your career is a very personal thing. Yeah, Richard.
Yes. I was thinking about climate change. And so in EA, we talk about how it might not be that big of an extinction risk. But then I still have the question of, well, what about just civilization collapse or any other bad outcomes? How likely would these kind of scenarios be?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm messing with the people in the room, and I will repeat what you just said because we didn't give you a microphone. But yes, a question around climate change and how big a risk it would be. Did you have a sense of what specific action you might take specifically? Do you want to is there like a meetup to go to, or do you want to just like ask a bunch of people about it? I think we are getting a microphone on its way. Thank you, Barry.
Test.
Hello. Yes, asking people seems like a good first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems great. And like you can look on Swapcard for people who have like an interest in climate change and see if you can reach out to them. That sounds like that's exactly the kind of thing that I think is like really good to make use of this weekend to do. Thanks so much. Yes. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to share? Yes, over here. Barry, thank you.
Yeah, I think I had 2 points, which was
long versus short term, and then human versus animal, where the human versus animal is very much from a perspective where, humans have the intellectual capability to actually help more animals. So if we help humans, it's like an exponential effect. And I think that was one of the things where I would like just one of the actions was just to ask people what do they think about this question, and to inform all this just data that we need more data. I think that is evident. Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think it's really complicated thinking about how some of these things might play out over the very long run and what seems like the most effective thing to do, even if your goal is to sort of help animals as much as possible. So I bet there's like a bunch of people who have really interesting thoughts on that you can ask at the conference. One last one, if anyone wants to share, totally fine if not. Yes, over here. Microphone coming from behind you.
Yeah, I think it's both for the cause area and for the original point about what do we want out of our career. Learning to operate with uncertainty and the fact that, as you mentioned, there's plenty of collective insight in this conference. How do you feel that you've reached a sufficient level of either self-knowledge or EA knowledge to make a concrete next step? Where do you draw that line?
I love that. That's a meta level uncertainty, the uncertainty of how to deal with uncertainty itself. Top marks. Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing that I bet you could get some really interesting perspectives from different people about how they've approached that in their career, and like try and find what seems like the right approach for you. Fantastic. Thanks so much for people for sharing at the workshop. Yeah, hopefully that gives other people some like food for thought of other things they might want to investigate too. Cool. Okay, so we've done this like the big picture bit of the thinking about like impact and particular cause areas, and then how do we turn this into thinking about career paths? So there's one way that you might think about what you should do for career planning is sort of have some kind of goal in mind. And roughly that seems useful because if you have a bit of an aim, it seems more likely that you're actually going to be able to get there. But I think we want to be a bit careful about being too prescriptive with what goal that with what goal you have in mind, because it's quite hard to predict the future. The earlier you are in your career, the harder it is to like get a sense of like what specific thing you want to aim at. So you want to get a balance between having like a goal to aim for and like not making it too prescriptive, giving yourself enough flexibility. So it seems good to have something to aim for beyond your next steps, and specifically seems good to aim high, because some people are underconfident, some people are overconfident, but in general, like the theme of this event is to be ambitious, and there's a lot of stuff that we can do to try and to do good in the world, and it seems like if you haven't put yourself in this headspace of thinking really ambitiously about what you could achieve, it seems really useful at the brainstorming stage to raise your aspirations and aim really high. So there's two types of longer term paths that it seems useful to think about. You might want to try and come up with a list of roles that would address specific needs in the problem area that you're interested in. So you might think that climate change is the thing that I'm really worried about. I think that like the real bottleneck is to do with like political will, for example. I think there needs to be like more advocacy or lobbying, and that's like a real bottleneck that's going on in this, like that would like really unlock a lot of value in this particular area. And so that might identify like, okay, maybe I want to like aim for like doing non-profit or lobbying or something like that. Hypothetical example. And this can be kind of useful because it helps you be really targeted towards like core bottlenecks in the problems that you want to make progress on. But there's another type of way of thinking of this sort of longer term path or the thing that you might want to aim for, which is just more generally aiming for what we call like transferable career capital that could be useful in the future. So you might think that if I was able to just become like a really good writer working in like a nationally respected outlet as a journalist, I would have a position of influence that I'm able to sort of use that to work on important problems later down the line. And this is not specifically like targeted at a particular bottleneck in a particular area, but it seems like a really kind of useful type of transferable career capital to have built up to enable you to do good later down the line. And I think both of these perspectives are useful, and it seems like you might want to try and think about goals in both terms and come up with some suggestions for both. The first is more kind of thinking top down from the problem, and the second is probably more thinking from your strengths and things that you're particularly good at and sort of projecting forwards from that. So if you're thinking this first kind of way, you might want to think about the bottlenecks in the problems that you care about. If you're thinking the second way, you might want to be trying to think about your sort of what unique kind of combinations of skills do you specifically have? What are your particular core strengths? And there are maybe some other prompts that you might want to consider when you're sort of coordinating with a community. What are the things that are actually most neglected in the community? Where would you like to see the portfolio of what we're doing shifted in which direction? So here are a bunch of different prompts on this page about things that you might want to consider if you're coming up with longer term paths. What we're going to do here is do a long brainstorm of a bunch of different longer term paths that might be able to either work on some of the problems that you really care about or be sort of like this kind of transferable career capital that will be really worthwhile later down the line. You can use as many of these prompts as you like. This is like a brainstorming activity. Come up with as many as you can, I think, that seem plausible. Does that make sense as an exercise? Yeah. Cool, okay, so I'm gonna give you 3 minutes for some brainstorming here on longer term paths. Off you go. I think this can be like a hard thing to do, to get yourself to think really broadly beyond the sort of, 4 careers that people seem to go on about a bunch as like impactful careers. But I think it's really important for people to think widely about different things that could play to their strengths or like that not enough people are doing, and to explore different areas. As a community, we can really coordinate, and different people should be able to sort of specialize in different directions. So this one was just the brainstorm, but you may know what's coming, be like thinking about your uncertainties and like seeing if you can make some progress on those. So I think this longer term paths question is just really useful, and it will be really helpful to see if you can like make your list better or get more information on them. So for example, maybe there's like a bunch of stuff that you found that kind of hard, and it's like hard to come up with enough examples, and maybe there's like a bunch of really useful things that are missing off the list. So it's possible that maybe one thing that you might want to do this weekend is sort of talk to a bunch of other people to find out what kinds of roles there actually are in the area that you're thinking about, to see if there are just opportunities you hadn't really thought about. So for example, if people I talk to who are concerned about sort of making AI go really well, maybe they don't want to do a PhD and become a technical AI safety researcher, or that's not a really good fit for them. But maybe they don't realize that actually there's like a ton of different roles for really good programmers or software engineers. Or maybe there are people in sort of AI hardware that could be doing something really useful, and there's like a whole bunch of different roles there. Or maybe you want to work in operations or like work as a recruiter or something, and a bunch of different really impactful AI safety organizations need those people too, and so there might be ways for you to contribute in that particular area. So I think this is like a big one that might be pretty useful to think about at this conference. Other things that you might want to consider are, what are the uncertainties that you have about the paths that you've written down? Maybe you have some concerns about, like, how does it fit with my personal priorities? Should I talk to some people who have been doing that to find out sort of how it matches with some of my deal breakers? Or maybe you're wondering about how competitive is it? Like, how well does it fit with someone with my particular kind of skill sets and aptitudes? And then, what kind of opportunities are there out there right now? How in demand is it potentially from a community perspective as well? Are like not enough people going in this direction? So ultimately, these are just like some of the kinds of uncertainties that you might have. You might have more. But again, I think this is hopefully going to be a really useful thing to think about Saturday morning, but we've got the whole kind of couple of days ahead of us. How could you make progress on some of these questions this weekend? Do you want to look up people who are working in the field or who are in like the kinds of roles that you want to get into? Do you want to talk to people a bit more about this kind of transferable capital type route and see like how easy they found it, being able to use their skills on something that was really valuable later down the line? So next exercise is going to be, is this kind of, what questions do you have about the longer term paths that you were thinking about? Maybe stuff around like what's missing, or questions that you have about the ones that you've come up with, and how can you make progress on that over this weekend? What networking sessions could you go to? Who could you reach out to and have a one-on-one? What kinds of questions do you want to ask people? Do you want to ask the same question to a bunch of different people and make a note of it? These kinds of things. Ready to do that exercise? Cool, okay, I'm gonna give you a little bit longer this time. Like 3 minutes or 4 minutes or so. Okay, That seems good. Is anyone up for sharing one of their kind of questions and what they're thinking of doing to make progress on them? Yes, lovely. Here.
Test.
Yeah, I think I'm mainly uncertain about where kind of the in-between steps are, or how to get like the preliminary experience or position to kind of then go into the roles and become influential kind of in the long term. So I think connecting and going to workshops like this and figuring out just kind of ideas about what to do kind of like right after I graduate.
Yeah, great question. I think this is probably a very common question, which is like, what is the best way to get into this specific path? And I think one thing you can do is, find out what specifically like individual people did to go into in that direction, or if that doesn't generalize as well, just like more generally what advice people might have for specific paths. Does anyone else want to share one of their uncertainties? Yes, over here.
My question was really on whether like it's easier to pivot from a technical side of things, like learning the technical side first, pivoting to public policy later, or starting in public policy and pivoting to the more technical side, which would be more achievable and less resource consuming.
I am not sure where you are in the room, but great question.
I'm right here.
Somewhere over there. Fantastic. Okay. That sounds like a great question to have, and like really good to have such a precise question to ask a bunch of different people. And hopefully by Sunday evening, you'll have some more thoughts on that. Anyone else? Yes, over here.
So when we talk about policy and impacting policy, my mind defaults to like federal and then like American based. That's like kind of runs everything. But you can have a lot of impact at like even like the hyper-local city and neighborhood level. I don't know if you have any take on trying to have more of a bottom-up versus top-down approach for impacting policy.
Great question. I think I won't answer that right now, but I think that's the kind of thing that you want to ask a bunch of people at the workshop. And at the conference. I like that this is it's also a question on like routes to impact as well, to just sort of get a sense of like which paths actually seem most valuable, as well as I think it's really great to have questions about that, not just about like how to get into a particular path. We have the last one, the lady at this table, who I think wanted to share something, and then we'll move on to the last little bit.
Yeah, I kind of have two main uncertainties. One of them is on the subject of what is needed, like where the bottlenecks are. So I have some ideas about where I could take my career, but I'm not sure which of those are actually most impactful. So that's a question to ask a lot of people. And then another one is how kind of involved on how to get started, but more how to test different career paths to try to get an idea if you would actually like them before you, say, get an econ PhD or something.
Yes, sounds good to test first. Ben Todd's talk after this one is about kind of the state of EA, which is quite useful for the sort of bottlenecks, some of the bottleneck stuff. But if you have specific questions of bottlenecks in a particular area, I do think this is like a great opportunity to try and get a sense from some of the people in the field about where the key bottlenecks are. Fantastic, thanks so much for people who shared their thoughts there. So I wanted to make sure that you guys actually had a chance to take some of the specific actions. So insofar as you have particular questions that you want answers to, maybe the specific action that you want to take is to look through swap cards, search by cause area, find a bunch of people who you could ask about this, message them and set up a meeting. So I wanted to make an opportunity in this session right now for you guys to take out your phones and actually take some of those actions. It's also fine if you want to like do something that would like to set it up for even after EAG. You could email someone else in the field who you want to chat with as well. But specifically, I think it would be great if you took the opportunity right now to set something up for the weekend. So yeah, message a person, pick an event, like formulate a question and like submit it in advance to one of the Q&A sessions, something like that. Okay, so for the last kind of 3 minutes, a chance to do that right now. Off you go. Okay, there's more time to do this just after this session ends, but I'm gonna just finish off with the last couple of slides before we run out of time. So just to flag that once after this weekend, you like have a better sense of some of your longer term paths that you want to aim for and maybe some sense of how to go in that direction. Roughly the rest of the kind of 80,000 hours career planning process takes you through thinking about like what career strategy you might want to pursue over the next until you sort of get to like your ultimate aims, and then thinking about your best next step, both thinking sort of backwards from where you want to get to and also forwards from like what are the best opportunities that present themselves to you right now. We encourage you to make backup plans, a plan A, a plan B, and like a backup plan Z if everything goes really badly wrong, so that you always have like a fallback thing. And then there's a strong emphasis on investigating your uncertainties, like pulling out from this process all of the questions that you had and then working out what you're going to go do to make some progress on those. So beyond the Effective Altruism Global Conference this weekend, things that you can do if you want to carry on this kind of process of thinking about your longer term career plans. You can try this 80,000 hours career planning process, the 8-week course. I think I really recommend people reach out to sort of your local groups or like professional networks like EA Finance or EA Medicine or something like that, especially if you have questions about like particular fields, or want to find other people to connect with to carry on talking about some of your uncertainties. You could try and find someone here who is going to like work with you to continue working on some of your uncertainties, like an accountability buddy you can do it together with. You can always apply to speak to the 80,000 hours team for one-on-one advising and then get like much more tailored questions and discussions with us. I'm going to finish there to give enough time for the next session to start, but you're more than welcome to stay here and carry on doing the messaging everyone on Swapcard to like actually make progress on some of the things that you were uncertain about. But thank you very much everyone for coming.